So we're going to go into Isaiah 23 this morning. Short chapter, relatively. And we're going to be, I think it's 18 verses. We're going to read through that and we'll discuss. So, the oracle concerning Tyre. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is laid waste without a house or harbor. From the land of Cyprus it is revealed to them. Be still, O inhabitants of the coast. The merchants of Sidon who cross the sea have filled you. And on many waters your revenue was the grain of Shihor, the harvest of the Nile. You were the merchant of the nations. Be ashamed, O Sidon, for the sea has spoken, the stronghold of the sea, saying, I have neither labored nor given birth. I have neither reared young men nor brought up young women. When the report comes to Egypt, they will be in anguish over the report about Tyre. Cross over to Tarshish. Wail, O inhabitants of the coast. Is this your exalted city, whose origin is from days of old, whose feet carried her to settle far away? Who has purposed this against Tyre, the bestower of crowns, whose merchants were princes, whose traders were the honored of the earth? The Lord of hosts has purposed it, to defile the pompous pride of all glory, to dishonor all the honored of the earth. Cross over your land like the Nile, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no restraint anymore. He has stretched out his hand over the sea. He has shaken the kingdoms. The Lord has given command concerning Canaan to destroy its stronghold. Or you will have no rest. Behold, the land of the Chaldeans. This is the people that was not. Assyria destined it for wild beasts. They erected their siege towers. They stripped her palaces bare. They made her a ruin. Wail, O ships of Tarshish, for your stronghold is laid waste. In that day Tyre will be forgotten for 70 years, like the days of one king. At the end of 70 years, it will happen to Tyre as in the song of the prostitute. Take a harp, go about the city, O forgotten prostitute. Make sweet melody, sing many songs that you may be remembered. At the end of 70 years, the Lord will visit Tyre, and she will return to her wages and will prostitute herself with all the kingdoms of the world on the face of the earth. Her merchandise and her wages will be holy to the Lord. It will not be stored or hoarded, but her merchandise will supply abundant food and fine clothing for those who dwell before the Lord. All right, so some confusing spots, I think, at least in the English throughout here. Maybe some spots even feel like contradiction there towards the end that we'll explore. But what do we see, at least as an overview? What are some of the things that jump out to you guys in this passage? Yeah, so I've kind of as a full summary, it's an oracle of judgment against Tyre and Sidon. All right, so what do we know about these cities? Who are Tyre and Sidon? Any ideas? Yeah, so these are sort of the two Phoenician capitals, right? So what we would call Phoenicia, which is north of Israel, so on the Mediterranean Sea. This is really the big international port for this part of the world. This is where really anything that's being imported into the Judean kind of area here is coming from, whether it's coming from Spain, which is where we believe Tarshish was, or from eventually from Rome, but also from Egypt. So anything that could come along the sea usually comes in through Tyre and Sidon. And as a result, it becomes a very wealthy, very large city because of that merchandise that's passing through and the tariffs and the things that they are able to charge on that. So what else do we see in here? What other nations are mentioned? Yes, we see Tarshish, so a port. We see Cyprus as well, so an island nation in the Mediterranean. We see the Nile in Egypt. So Egypt is brought into view. We spent a good bit of time talking about Egypt in the last couple of oracles. We see Canaan. Who do we see in 13? You know, see Assyria, but that first part. Who are the Chaldeans? You guys remember those guys? Chaldeans become a certain large nation later on. Babylon, yeah. So Chaldeans were a political class of the Babylons, actually a tribe originally that eventually became the ruling class of Babylon and overthrew Assyria down the road. Yeah. So what do we know about Tyre and Sidon? Does anybody know anything from previous stories in the Old Testament? What's the history of Tyre and Sidon with Israel and with Judah? Do we have any stories that come to mind? Think of David and Solomon. Let's go take a look at it. So let's go to 1 Kings. Let me pull on here. 1 Kings, we're going to go to, let's start in 5. 1 Kings 5:1. Kept you guys on a cliffhanger there for a second. First Kings 5. All right, so preparations for building the temple, maybe the heading that you have there, but 1 Kings 5. Now Hiram, king of Tyre, all right, so there we go, sent his servants to Solomon when he heard that they had anointed him king in place of his father. For Hiram always loved David. And Solomon sent word to Hiram, you know that David my father could not build a house for the name of the Lord his God because of the warfare with which his enemies surrounded him, until the Lord put them under the soles of his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side. There is neither adversary nor misfortune. And so I intend to build a house for the name of the Lord my God. As the Lord said to David my father, your son, whom I will set on your throne in your place, shall build the house for my name. Of course, we're talking about the temple, right? So he says, now therefore command that the cedars of Lebanon be cut for me. My servants will join your servants, and I will pay you for your servants such wages as you set. For you know that there is no one among us who knows how to cut timber like the Sidonians. And as soon as Hiram heard the words of Solomon, he rejoiced greatly and said, blessed be the Lord this day, who has given to David a wise son to be over this great people. And Hiram sent to Solomon, saying, I have heard the message that you sent to me. I'm ready to do all you desire in the matter of cedar and cypress timber. My servants will bring it down the sea from Lebanon, and I will make it into rafts to go by sea to the place you direct. I'll have them broken up there, and you'll receive it, and you will meet my wishes by providing food for my household. So Hiram supplied Solomon with all the timber of cedar and cypress that he desired, while Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, and 20,000 cores of beaten oil. Solomon gave this to Hiram year by year, and the Lord gave Solomon wisdom as he promised him, and there was peace between Hiram and Solomon, and the two of them made a treaty. Okay, so Hiram, king of Tyre, was the king of Tyre during the reign of David as well, and was a strong ally of David, loved King David. Solomon took over the throne. He continued that love for David and for the king of Israel by setting up basically a treaty, an alliance for trade, to produce all of the wood and the building supplies for the temple. All right, that's important because we see that with really without Tyre, you don't have the cedars of Lebanon coming in. You don't have all of these building supplies. So the temple of the Lord is actually built thanks to the relationship with Tyre. Now, what happens later on with Tyre is that we see that they cooperate commercially over the temple. Solomon later on in 1 Kings 11, which if you guys will just skip over a couple pages, we see the next part of the story with Tyre. So things start off great for Solomon. They don't last. In all of his wisdom, he makes some boneheaded choices as he goes along. All right, so we see just in a couple chapters, the Queen of Sheba comes to visit. We have at the end of chapter 10 this long description of all of Solomon's wealth, and at the end of that, we go to chapter 11, verse 1, and we see of all of that wealth. It says, now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, which is Tyre, Phoenicia, and Hittite women from the nations concerning which the Lord has said to the people of Israel, You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither will they love you, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. And Solomon clung to these in love. All right. And if you go down there to verse 4, when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians. All right. So, good news about Tyre, right? They provide the timber and the trade and the treaty to get the temple built. Bad news about Tyre and Sidon, what? Solomon takes a wife from there and turns away from the Lord and turns to Ashtoreth, their goddess. And so we see the Tyre become a repeated pattern and symbol and type throughout the rest of the Old Testament of the corrupting influence of foreign nations on the spiritual life of Israel, because their women, their daughters, helped to convert Solomon away from worship of the true God and into worship of other gods, not just the Sidonian and the Tyre gods, but of other gods throughout Canaan. And so now we see judgment for that back in Isaiah 23, because of the influence that Tyre's had on the spiritual decline of Israel. We see it's interesting that Tyre wraps up this passage of oracles, because so much of the oracles so far have been about what kind of alliances. You guys remember the alliance with Egypt, the alliance with Moab, with these other nations. What kind of alliances were they seeking? You guys remember? So Assyria is threatening to invade. Military and political alliances, right? So especially with Egypt, they're saying, listen, if you protect us from the Assyrians, we'll continue to partner with you. We'll ally with you. We'll have these political alliances. And so we see that the political influence that these nations have on Judah and on Israel, ultimately it leads Israel into destruction from Assyria, because they ally with Syria and they ally with Egypt. And eventually Assyria comes in and destroys all three of them. But with Judah resists the political alliances, but we have this final oracle against Tyre, which was really one of the ultimate sources of Judah's spiritual decline, because of the alliance that was held with Solomon and with Hiram, and then eventually with Hiram's daughters. So we're going to shift then from a political alliance to a spiritual judgment here. So as we go along, go kind of verse by verse here. We see, so wail, O ships of Tarshish, for Tyre is laid waste without house or harbor. All right, so O ships of Tarshish, that's a fun word to say over and over again, by the way, Tarshish. But ships of Tarshish was like a physically, yes, the ships of the port Tarshish, of the city-state Tarshish, which we believe was in Spain. But regardless, it was sort of on the opposite end of the Mediterranean. If you remember when Jonah decided that he wanted to get out. Okay, opposite end of the world. So when Jonah got the message to go to Nineveh, he went to Tyre and Sidon. And where did he try to go? To Tarshish, right? Because it was about as far away as he could get from Nineveh, right, by sea. So yeah, it's some good fish over there. Yeah, big fish out there. Yeah. And so Tarshish is sort of the other side of the sea world. And so they're known as being another very, very large international port. So the ships of Tarshish is not literally just the ships of this port, but it's like another name for like a class of ship, like the largest of the vessels of the merchant fleet. We see these in 1 Kings 10, a description there of just how large they are. And again, just Psalm 48:7 gives us a picture of just how large these ships are. And they go great distances to the different Phoenician colonies along the Mediterranean coast. So Phoenicia is what we call this region where Tyre and Sidon are sort of the capital cities, but they have colonies all along the Mediterranean through Greece and through Italy and over to Spain that they use to conduct this international port business. And so these massive trading ships are the ones that are going through that area, probably not unlike the one that Jonah jumped on, more than likely. And so they are coming, those ships that are usually loaded down with all of this material, all this merchandise, are wailing because they're coming to the port and not finding anything. They can't find anything, house or harbor. So what two places are we looking at? We're talking about house and harbor. Where's the house located? Where's the harbor located? Yes. By the sea. So like the harbor is the sea, the house is on the land, right? So they're looking on land and sea, and they can't find any evidence of Tyre being there. They're coming to get their materials, their goods, and Tyre is completely laid waste. So house or harbor is just a description of how just devastating this judgment and this destruction is. And from the land of Cyprus, it is revealed to them. Cyprus being an island nation in the middle of the Mediterranean, good ways off from Tyre. But even they've heard of it, even they've seen it, right? And they've noticed what's happened. They've seen the destruction. And so it says in verse 2, "Be still, O inhabitants of the coast, because the merchants of Sidon who cross the sea have filled you. And on many waters your revenue is the grain of Shihor, the harvest of the Nile, and you were the merchants of the nation." So we see be silent has the senses of both like being still, but also being like motionless. So the beginning of this poem here that we have from 1 through 12 is a poem that Isaiah is writing. You can see your Bible probably has the indentations and the justification a little bit different. So we do have, it's interesting to see how this is set up. So 1 through 14, you'll see it starts with wail of ships of Tarshish. And then it ends in verse 14 with wail, O ships of Tarshish, for your stronghold is laid waste. All right. So everything in between is coming together with symmetry, right? Starts and ends with those refrains. So being silent, the beginning of the stanza, this part of the poem contrasts with the following impression of a bustling international port, right? So be still, O inhabitants of the coast. The merchants of Sidon who cross the sea have filled you. So if the merchants across the sea have come in and filled this port, why is it silent, right? There's a contradiction there. We see just the justification. It's normally loud, it's normally bustling, it's this huge international city. If you can think of like New York being right there on the harbor, or you think of Jacksonville, sometimes the craziness there with the port there, it is now completely silent due to the devastation. Many waters, your revenue is the grain of Shihor. So the grain of Shihor, Shihor being a region in Egypt. Egypt was what we would call like a breadbasket. You guys ever heard that term, like a nation? So Ukraine right now would be what we call like a breadbasket. They provide much of the grain for Europe and for Russia and for parts of Africa. And this would be sort of how Egypt was at the time. So the Nile River, very, very fertile area, very fertile land. And so lots of wheat growing in Egypt. If you remember the story of Joseph, remember what they were storehousing? Joseph was storing grain, right, during the famine. Egypt, very well known for their grain. And so the harvest of the Nile, being the merchant of the nations, we see that grain, where was it coming in to Judah and to Syria and to Israel? It's coming in through this port, right? So they're exporting it. Okay, Syria, you got to stop. You got to stop listening to me. Let's turn on movie mode. Maybe that'll happen. So all of this export from Egypt to feed this region is coming in through Tyre and Sidon, through that international port. And as a result, they've gotten this title, the Merchant of Nations, there in verse 3. Because whether things are coming in from Egypt or they're coming in from Europe or from Spain or from Cyprus, they're all coming in through Phoenicia, through this area. And it's made it a very, very wealthy, powerful, influential nation. But how does Isaiah say that they should feel about this? Well, verse 4, that they should be ashamed, right? They should be ashamed of Sidon. Ashamed goes beyond the feeling of like embarrassment into the more like public idea of like reaping shame. So like an expectation of like coming to nothing and being an object of like ridicule and mocking. So not only is it's like it's not just feeling embarrassed, but it's like publicly you've been mocked, ridiculed, put down. Why? Because the sea has spoken, the stronghold of the sea, saying, I've neither labored nor given birth. I've neither reared young men nor brought up young women. All right, so what does this mean? That the sea has not labored or given birth, or the sea has not reared young men or brought up young women? Any ideas? You guys ever met a sea that could do that? No, not outside of like Greek mythology, right? Like Poseidon and those kind of things. So what does it mean then that the sea has never labored or given birth? Any ideas?
Not a picture of the Savior, maybe?
No, not a picture of the Savior. No. All right. So what do Tyre and Sidon? Yeah.
God making man out of the dust of the ground, as opposed to.
So yeah. So let's probably yeah. So the sea was a god to many nations. So you think of the Greeks, they had the Poseidon, the king of the god of the sea. You had Neptune for the Romans. The sea was a very powerful thing. If you think of just a storm on the sea and how just devastating that could be, you think of flooding, you think of all those kind of things. But it provided a lot of life as well. Yeah, exactly. So without it, there's no trade, there's no fishing, those kind of things. So there's a lot of respect for the sea. There's worship for the sea in a lot of cultures. Surely with Tyre and Sidon as well. If you guys remember, Dagon, I think it was Dagon of the Assyrians. Was what? You guys know what shape he was? It's a fish. He is a fish. It's a big fish, right? So the Assyrians worshipped a big fish, and that's kind of the funny part of when Jonah shows up, right? After being in a big fish for a while, to minister to people who worship the fish. So that's a whole separate story. So the worship of the sea is obviously going to be very important for these people. And the sea itself is the source of their wealth. It's the source of their livelihood. It's the source of their power. But what does the sea say to them? The sea says, I've neither labored nor given birth. I haven't brought up young men or brought up young women. They're looking to the sea to help them, right? So they're facing judgment. They're facing destruction. And the sea is saying, listen, I can't give you men to replace the ones that are dying in battle. I can't give you young women to continue your lines. I've never labored nor given birth. Like don't look to the sea to restore your population. You have been completely destroyed, and there's nothing the sea can do to help you with that. In verse 5, when the report comes to Egypt, they will be in anguish over the report about Tyre. All right. So we see this phrase kind of connects to the verse above it. So that I have neither reared young men or brought up young women connects to the report of Egypt. The translation of that is probably more closely, rather than I have neither reared young men, it's probably more like I am as though I had never. So it's empty, it's desolate, it's completely wiped out. And it's sort of the initial report of the judgment that's come against Tyre and Sidon. And so we see what happens when that report comes to Egypt in verse 5. That there's anguish over the report about Tyre. All right, so Egypt, why are they going to be upset about the report of Tyre? Who's buying all their grain?
Yeah, they lost an important trader.
Yeah. If you've got a lot of supply and nowhere to take it, no port to take it to, no buyers to take it to, there's going to be woe there. And also, what do we remember about Egypt? What was Egypt like actively doing during this period? Because remember. I might remember it better because I taught it, I think, the last time I was here. But what was Egypt politically doing in all of these areas while Assyria is working its way in? All right.
Is Egypt trying to form alliances as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So Egypt's been going around to all these different nations saying, align with us and we'll help you against Assyria, right? And so if you've got a major international port city as one of your alliances against Assyria, and all of a sudden that port city falls, probably to Assyria, you're going to be a little concerned about it, right? If you're Egypt, from a political standpoint and from a financial standpoint. All right. So verse 7, or verse 6 and 7 here, we see cross over to Tarshish. So that we see then this picture of sort of expanding news of the report, right? So the first report is in Sidon in verse 4. That report then goes to Egypt nearby. In verse 5, that report's going to spread over to Tarshish, right, to the far coast. So cross over to Tarshish and wail, O inhabitants of the coast. Is this your exultant city whose origin is from days of old, whose feet carried her to settle far away? Right, so the report has now gone all the way across the sea to Tarshish, and they've found out that this city has fallen. This city that they were, this exultant city, this elaborate, important city, whose origin, very, very old origin there, and whose feet carried her to settle far away, right? So Tyre and Sidon on the coast, they develop these boats, and they use that to carry and themselves far away, to do trade across the sea, to set up these colonies. And so there's this picture then that she is spread, she is carried far away across the coast, but now she's gone. Verse 8, who has purposed this against Tyre? The bestower of crowns, whose merchants were princesses, whose traders were the honored of the earth. All right, so they're asking then, who's caused this? Who is behind this destruction? Who has purposed this destruction against Tyre? And then there are these accolades again for Tyre. So the bestower of crowns, merchants are princes, traders are honored across the earth. Right. So the first of all, to the mind behind the change in Tyre's fortune, who is behind this change? Who has purposed it? God, right? The Lord has purposed this. That's ultimately. But when Tyre founded colonies, they were ruled by the kings that Tyre appointed, right? So as Tyre goes out and creates a new colony in Greece or along the coastline, they're going to put one of their princes, I keep saying princess, one of their princes in as the king of that city, right? And as they build a new colony, they're going to put in a new king there, just as the English installed governors, right? As they set up colonies over here. If you're going to set up a new colony, you're going to send your people to manage it and to take care of it. And so Tyre becomes this sort of this reputation of being the bestower of crowns, and the merchants that are princes, because they're setting up all these little fief kingdoms along the coast that are then in turn supplying their port. And so they become known as sort of this symbol of authority and of political power, because not only do they have these colonies across the board, but they have control over them. They have all these princes. Yeah, probably. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the picture we get for sure. There's a lot of pride there in the port as well, and in their power, and the fact that, and we see it in verse 9, the Lord of hosts has purposed it to defile the pompous pride of all glory, to dishonor all the honored of the earth. All right, so do you guys see the shift there in 8 and 9 with honor? All right, so the traders of Tyre are the honored of the earth. So the people of the earth who look at Tyre, who see these colonies, who see this port, hold them in high honor, right? Because they're wealthy, they're powerful. But what is the Lord purpose to do in verse 9? Well, he purposes to dishonor the honored of the earth, right? To bring them down, to humble them, to defile their pompous pride of all of their glory. Princess and honored ones of the earth are in Tyre's service. And the thought is not of Tyre's like possible temptation to pride. It's not that they might become prideful, right? It's that they are, with all of this greatness, with all of this wealth, with all of this influence, Tyre is at last faced with the one person who, or one being, one God who does not care for their wealth, or for their power, or their influences. They finally met someone who isn't impressed, right, and who is there to take down their pride, the Lord Almighty. Now, why he is planning this, we're not told, but he is the judge of all the earth. He does what is right, Genesis 18:25, and he decrees to demean the pride of every beauty, to treat with contempt all the honored of the earth. God will not share his pride and his glory with anyone else. And so he then goes to purpose to bring Tyre into judgment. So how do we do this? Where does the judgment come from? Verse 10. So cross over your land like the Nile, O daughter of Tarshish. There is no restraint anymore. He has stretched out his hand over the sea, and he has shaken the kingdoms. The Lord has given command concerning Canaan to destroy its strongholds, and he said, you will no more exult, O oppressed virgin daughter of Sidon. Arise, cross over to Cyprus, and even there you will have no rest. So 10 through 12 is the picture of the judgment happening, right? It's coming along. Verse 12 could probably be better translated as traverse your land like the Nile, daughter of Tarshish. No longer is there restraint. we see the NIV understands the word mesa as harbor, but if it has anything to do with shipping, it's like a shipbuilding, not like ships coming into port. So that word's found in Job 12 and in Psalm 109, and it's as the word belt, so like something that holds your clothes together, holds your clothes up. And here it's used metaphorically over the hold that Tarshish has over Tyre, like a belt. Tarshish as a major giant port city, and as the one that's building all of these ships. Remember, the ships of Tarshish is more of like shipyards than like a full port. And so obviously the kingdoms of Tyre and Sidon are going to be very closely relying on Tarshish for their boats, for their ships, for their merchants. And so there's a very tight relationship here. And the word even that Isaiah uses is like a belt that's holding it together. So you see that idea of restraint. And then we see that picture then in verse 10 where it says, there is no restraint anymore. So it's that idea of that belt being released. There is no longer anything holding them together. So the explanation of this newfound liberty that Tyre has from Tarshish is that the Lord has stretched out his hand, right, in verse 11. He has shaken the kingdoms, and he has given command to destroy the strongholds. And to ultimately, he has given an order concerning Canaan to destroy her fortresses and to bring Sidon's joy to an end. Stretched out is a word that we've heard in judgment before, particularly in the Egyptian story. So if you guys think of Exodus 14 and 15, the Lord stretched out his hand over the army of Egypt, right? He stretched out his hand over the Red Sea, and it obeyed him. It split. He destroyed the army of the Egyptians. This stretched out is the idea of God having ultimate sort of power, to do what he wants to do, right, against anybody who stands against him. And so Canaan is used of Phoenicia in Joshua 5:1. So this picture is when it says, Lord has given command concerning Canaan to destroy its strongholds. It's not a picture of Canaan destroying the strongholds of Tyre and Sidon. It's that Canaan is being seen as Tyre and Sidon. So the Lord is giving command to destroy Tyre and Sidon there in verse 11. And so verse 12 is it's a fourfold edict against Sidon. There are four sort of pieces of this that we can go. So first, you're not going to exult anymore. You're not going to celebrate anymore. Second, this idea of an oppressed virgin daughter, which there's a lot of language there compressed into a couple words. Third is arise and cross over to Cyprus. And then four, this idea of no rest, right? So we'll look at these kind of independently. So the first is the loss of joy, the end of reveling, the loss of peace. So we see this loss of joy. If you guys remember in Isaiah 22, when Jason was teaching through the Valley of Vision, what was Jerusalem? What were they doing in the midst of Assyria sort of leaving them alone after destroying everything around them? Were they in mourning or were they in celebration? Celebration, right? They were having wine parties on the rooftops and saying, let's eat and drink because tomorrow we'll die. So this idea of celebration and just gluttony and excess is not limited to Judah. The condemnation against Judah is that they were looking like the nations around them, right? They were acting like the nations around them. And so no longer is there exaltation and partying in Tyre and Sidon, right? It's quiet, as he said earlier. It is silent because the partying is ended. The joy has ended because of the destruction. The second edict is the loss of peace. So this idea of the oppressed virgin daughter, the idea really of the loss of peace is sort of like crushed, or like to be oppressed or to be wronged or to extort. And so it's not even like they're just being destroyed. It's like they're being extorted. They're being crushed. They're being just destroyed. And that picture of the oppressed virgin daughter of Sidon is much more graphic than our Bibles are sharing with us. The inhabitants of Sidon is what is sort of the metaphor that we see there. So they're called the virgin daughter, but the picture here is of the judgment being like the violation of like rape, like sexual assault. Like this is the picture that we see. And so not is it just oppression over loss of peace and destruction, it's like physical violation of their people and of the nation itself of the that's how violent this judgment is going to be against them. And if we know anything about the Assyrians, we know that that's absolutely the case. The third edict here is the loss of tenure. So they're going to be exiled and they're going to have to cross over to Cyprus. So this large, opulent port city that they've built in Tyre, it's going to be emptied out. They're all going to be kicked out and they're going to be sent over to the tiny island of Cyprus. They're going to be exiled there. And so they're going to not only lose their men, their women, but they're going to be losing their city, their wealth as well, and their home as they're exiled away. And it says, even there, you will have no rest. So that's the fourth consequence of that loss, the unending experience of a displaced person who can find no rest, right? This is reserved for the last stanza of the poem, so as to make a connection between the downfall of Tyre and Sidon and the way that it has come about. Right? So in verse 11, the Lord gave the order and stretched out his hand. But we're now to learn who received his command and why these displaced Sidonians are not going to find rest. Right? So Tiglath-Pileser, who is the king of Assyria, it's got a fun name, began his bid for world domination in 745. By 738, he was able to impose a military governor on Tyre and take over. So Tyre, however, continued to be peaceful, continued to be at rest under Assyrian governance. And in 729 was compelled to pay an indemnity of 150 gold talents. So a tax, basically, or a tribute. It's an interesting noise. Shalmaneser, who then became the king, besieged Tyre unsuccessfully. And at the end of the 8th century BC, Tyre was still in rebellion, and it was negotiating with Egypt against Assyria. So we see that Egypt kind of poking the bear again. Sennacherib laid the mainland to waste, who's as the new king of Assyria, in 701, and did a lot of damage to Tyrian trade. And according to some of the history books, only with the decline of Assyria around 630 did Tyre actually regain complete independence and the capability of creating new riches. So it's interesting to see from 701 to 630, how many years is that?
About 70.
About 70. There we go. Okay, so keep that number in mind, right? So we keep looking here. We see the tendency to meddle and revolt meant continuing trouble with great empires. So they were not. This was not their only rebellion. They continued to rebel. Tyre did. So Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians, opened up a 13-year siege in 586 without success. And then the Persian king Artaxerxes III besieged Tyre in 333, but it withstood all assailants until at last it fell to Alexander the Great in 332. So thus we see it's needless to look outside Isaiah's period for justification for an oracle on Tyre. He would be lacking in the sense of the issues of the day, Isaiah would, if he failed to include Tyre in his purview because of Tyre's reputation for rebellion. But as far as his forecast of the fall of Tyre is concerned, if the seizure of this rock city, this rock fortress, is required, then it wasn't until Alexander that it was fulfilled. But the thrust of the oracle is really more that Tyre becomes unsafe for shipping and it's come to a standstill with the loss of life and the amount of refugees. So Tyre doesn't actually fall until 333. And if you guys remember, this is being written around 685, if I'm thinking, around 700. But so about 400 years after this is written, before Tyre actually falls. But the constant assault by the Assyrians and then the Babylonians and then the Persians and then the Greeks means that it's rest, this idea of it not having rest, ultimately affects its business, right? Do you go, if you have two opportunities to do business with someone, And one of them is all over the place, just a mess in a bad part of town where the windows are getting shot up all the time. And you have the other choice of going into a nice part of town and working with someone who has a great reputation. Which business do you choose to do business with? Yeah, unless you're Gene Rowell, right? You go to the other one, right? You're good. You know Bob Gene, yeah. So I love you, Gene. But yeah, no, you go to the one with the high reputation where it's safe to do business, right? And so what happens then is that Tyre and Sidon have this awesome reputation leading up to this, that they are a port where it is safe to come and do business because they have the help and the alliance of Assyria, of Egypt. They have the help and alliance of Judah and Israel, help and alliance of Tarshish and all of their colonies. It's safe. It's a place that's helped them to grow and to flourish. But because they're going to be, the judgment is going to be just constant assault against their rock city, it becomes unsafe to do business in Tyre and Sidon. And that is what causes their downfall. Gene Jr. Yes, Gene Jr. Gene Sr. Always Junior, yeah. And so you see, that's really what the judgment is. It's not that they're fully destroyed. They are fully destroyed in 333 or 332 by Alexander the Great. But it's the constant persecution that helps them to lose their status as a safe place to do business. And as a result, they lose their reputation, they lose their riches.
The history there on Tyre is really interesting. They used to have their own ports. Everybody, they thumbed their noses at everybody. Alexander came in, they thumbed their nose at Alexander and he mad. So he tore down all the stuff and built a bridge out to the island because no one had ships. And he built a bridge out there and took his army and just wiped it out. Nothing left.
Yep.
It's kind of interesting history.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, and because they thought they had all of the security in this rock fortress right there on the port. And ultimately, yeah, Alexander just built a bridge and said, "Here we go. We'll do it that way." Yeah, we'll do it that way. So that's what we see when it says there, "You will have no rest." That's really important to talk about that because when we're talking about what the judgment looks like, that's what the judgment ultimately looked like. I think we've got time. No, we don't. Just kidding. It's after 8. We're gonna have to come back to this then because it's already 8:02. We're halfway through it. Let's go ahead and close, and then we'll start in verse 13 next week. All right. Father, we thank you for this morning. We thank you for the opportunity to study your word. We thank you for the word of Isaiah. Father, help us to see where our own pride and our own desire for glory and for importance and for wealth can cloud our minds, Father. Help us to see how the influence of the world can pollute our hearts and can draw us away from you. Father, protect us. Help us to seek you through your Spirit, even this morning. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.